Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Bishop Bryan Ouellette of the Holy Nicholean Catholic Church for Vestiges of Christianity on this January 25th, 2017, the conversion of St. Paul, the feast of the conversion of St. Paul. And today we're going to be getting into some controversial territory here. The Women's March, the protest against the inauguration of President Donald Trump. And how should we think about this? How should we feel about this? As Christians, should we support this movement? On the surface, it seems like it has some good points. Everybody at the fundamental core would agree that human rights are something that we should fight for, but does Women's March represent human rights? Or is there something more sinister at the source of its motivation? This and more today with Deacon Thomas Moreland on Vestiges of Christianity. Don't go anywhere. It's going to be a good show. Well, welcome back, everyone, to another edition of Vestiges of Christianity, coming to you live from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. It's a beautiful day out there, actually. It's starting to get a little chilly again. I think we got some snow in the forecast, so probably going to expect something coming up here. But today we've got a pretty interesting and unsettling topic. And I don't want to waste too much time talking about introductions and everything, because we never have enough time on a 45-minute show, and we hope to be able to expand that for you soon. Got some exciting things on the horizon for both this ministry, this show, and the Holy Nicholean Catholic Church as a whole. Nothing I can announce just yet, but it's looking pretty good so far. And at that point, we hope to be able to give you more Vestiges of Christianity. So, by all means, continue to support us if you can by going to esotericcatholic.org and providing us with a generous donation so that we can assure that this show continues. We are completely 100% donation based, and then when we don't receive donations, we have to pay out of pocket, and there is never enough money to be able to do everything. So if you don't support us, we're limited with what we can do. Anyway, today we are going to be talking about the Women's March. Biggest news of the week, I would say, other than the inauguration of the president. And it's a good starting point, good launching point for a discussion, or I should say a theological discussion, of the Women's March. Because I'll tell you right now, I'm seeing a lot of Roman Catholics supporting it. I'm seeing a lot of Christians supporting it. And I think they're doing so on the basis of this being a women's rights issue. But I hope to be able to enlighten you some over the course of the next 40 minutes or so as we break down exactly what Women's March represents and how we as Christians should look at it. So before we go any further, let's go ahead and bring Deacon Thomas Moreland on. He's with us today. How are you doing today, Deacon?
I'm doing good. How are you doing today?
I am doing fantastic. Thank you so much for asking. It's a good topic, and I know that this is something that kind of upsets you quite a bit. So, and myself as well. It's disturbing. It's very disturbing. The mentality that is out there regarding, the nature of this march and the objections that are being presented to the current executive administration for the United States. We've already talked a great deal about the politics of the situation and how we should look at the election. That was one show that we did right before the election, and I think we presented a great deal of our views. And you lean more on the conservative side. I'm very, very moderate, but also leaning towards the conservative side of the argument in most cases, with the exception I've got some liberal views, and I think the audience knows that. I support nationalized health care, which Donald Trump did originally. That was part of his original platform when he started out. So he's not too far from my perspective on it. And I've got some interesting ideas as to how that should be implemented. But we're not going to get into that today. But we are going to get into the mission statement of Women's March. I think that's a good starting point for this discussion. I've lost quite a few friends on Facebook over my position on the march. I've been very, very critical. If you do follow me on Facebook, then you already know this. I'm extremely critical of Women's March, and but I don't know if everyone really understands why, because the rebuttals that I'm receiving are that it's about human rights. How can you not get behind human rights? What kind of bishop are you? What kind of Christian are you if you can't get behind human rights? And my problem is, Women's March has very little to do with human rights and a lot to do with political bias and with a great deal of sinister motivations at its core. And I want to break down some of those things. And again, this is a Christian audience largely that listens to this show. I'm sure we have a lot of people from different walks of life who find it interesting. But the show is essentially to talk to people about authentic Christianity, whether you are Christian or otherwise. And so I would like to think that the fundamental ideals of Christianity are universal and acceptable to everyone. Unfortunately, that's not the case because there's a great deal of misunderstanding and, once again, political bias at the heart of people's decision making. In other words, they're not thinking for themselves. They're letting a political ideology think for them. And that's a very unfortunate reality. But again, a topic for another time. So, Deacon, I'm going to start off with the mission statement here. I'm only going to touch on a few things because it's quite long. But from the womensmarch.com website, it states that the rhetoric of the past election cycle has insulted, demonized, and threatened many of us immigrants of all statuses, Muslims, and those of diverse religious faiths, people who identify as LGBTQIA, yes, we have to add the IA now because it wasn't inclusive enough before, Native people, black and brown people, people with disabilities, survivors of sexual assault in our communities are hurting and scared. We are confronted with the question of how to move forward in the face of national and international concern and fear. In the spirit of democracy and honoring the champions of human rights, dignity, and justice who have come before us, we join in diversity to show our presence in the numbers too great to ignore. The Women's March on Washington will send a bold message to our new government on their first day in office and to the world that women's rights are human rights. We stand together recognizing that defending the most marginalized among us is defending all of us. We support the advocacy and resistance movements that reflect our multiple and intersecting identities. We call on all defenders of human rights to join us. This march, in the first step towards unifying our communities, grounded in new relationships to create change from the grassroots level up. We will not rest until women have parity and equity at all levels of leadership in society. We work peacefully while recognizing there is no true peace without justice and equity for all. And then we have some guiding principles here that reiterate. Principle 1 says, nonviolence in a way of life for courageous people. Principle 3, attack forces of evil, not persons doing evil. The nonviolent approach helps one analyze the fundamental conditions, policies, and practices of the conflict rather than reacting to one's opponents or their personalities. Principle 5, avoid internal violence of the spirit as well as external physical violence. Okay. These sound great on the surface, doesn't it? I mean, it sounds like, yeah, let's get behind nonviolence, let's get behind human rights, let's support, women's rights. I mean, these are at least superficially wonderful things to talk about. Avoiding internal violence of the spirit as well as external physical violence. Yeah, I can get behind that. Problem is, this is hypocrisy. This is absolute lies and fabrications. And I'm going to explain why. Because at the heart of feminism, and I don't care if you're talking about radical feminism or if you're talking about the more moderate forms, at the heart of feminism is this concept that women have a right to control every aspect of their bodies. And again, you might say, well, Bishop, what's wrong with that? Of course they should have that right. And I would agree, with the exception of once they become impregnated, their body is no longer just theirs. They become a custodian for a completely different body. And this is where the issue parts ways. And this is at the heart of every feminist movement. This is at the heart of when they try to claim human rights. I can tell you right now, it doesn't include the rights of the unborn, who have no rights. Legally, they don't, which is why abortion's legal. And that's the thing. We can say that abortion is murder, but if the government doesn't recognize it as murder, murder is a legal term. And we talked about this on the show where we discussed the election cycle. Murder is a legal term, and it is defined as unlawfully killing someone. And there are lawful ways to kill people. Execution in states that have capital punishment. In war, killing is permissible. That's not considered murder. Self-defense, it's not necessarily considered murder. But abortion falls into that category because the fetus has not been given human rights. It sounds a lot like how this country used to operate when black people didn't have rights. It could be justified. The atrocities committed against black people in the form of slavery, segregation, racism, okay, were all justified on the basis that they did not have human rights, that they were not entitled to human rights. And that's exactly what this movement is saying about the unborn. So, the reason why Christians, and Catholics in particular, since Catholics are the most active against abortion, Christians need to condemn Women's March. If you do not condemn Women's March, then you have no right to call yourself a Christian. Sorry, but you don't. And I'm going to give you the justification for it right now. The fact of the matter is, it has always been accepted Christian theology, going back to the very beginnings of the church, even before the church. It has always been accepted Christian theology that life began, or I should say life begins, at conception. The personhood and dignity of the individual begins at conception. So if you support Women's March, then you are in violation of 2,000 plus years of Judeo-Christian theology. Now you might say, well, show me the justification. Well, I can right now. You want to get into the Old Testament? We can start with the book of Jeremiah. And in chapter 1, verse 5, it states, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I dedicated you." Why would God do this for Jeremiah if it was just a mass of unimportant cells? Why would this be stated? Now, you might say, well, I don't believe the Bible. It's, I'm not a Christian. I don't find there any value in that. And that's fine. Okay, that's your position. But the problem that I'm also stating is, historically speaking, the people who wrote this, even if you don't want to believe it's inspired by God, saw that that philosophically the fetus was more than just a mass of cells. That's got historical precedent. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, also from the Old Testament, Psalm 139. Okay, chapter 13. You formed my inmost being. You knit me in my mother's womb. In my mother's womb, not outside of it. Inside. The process of fetal development is a sacred process of the sanctity of life. Pure Judeo-Christian theology here. Okay? If we want to get into the New Testament, we can start talking about John the Baptist and the parts of the nativity story when Mary goes to visit Elizabeth and the child in Elizabeth's womb leaps for joy because he can sense the presence of the Savior in Mary's womb. Just a mass of cells? Okay. Well, maybe for atheists and non-Christians they can justify it, but for the Christian, I don't think so. There is no justification. You're running out of options to escape from the evils of supporting this movement. Because the Bible disagrees with you. And now, lastly, if we want to get into apostolic tradition, let's look at the Didache. Because in the Didache, which was written in about 150 AD, so, about 80 years after the Gospels, depending upon which gospel you're talking about. But in the Didache it states, written again, 150 AD, you shall not murder a child by abortion or kill one when born. I mean, what more do you want? It's telling you right there. The Didache is the foundation of the early church and the theology of the early church that became Christianity as we know it. And it says it right there, plain and simple. The Didache was even considered at a period of time to be sacred scripture and was almost included in the canon of the New Testament. It just eventually, when it reached the end, it didn't have enough of the kind of content that was what they were looking for when they were forming the canon. But the Didache was actually utilized by certain Christian groups, proto-Orthodox Christian groups, as being sacred scripture. And it says right there, you shall not kill a child by abortion. 150 AD, Christian tradition. What more evidence do you need that it is not acceptable? And then we can even go further, if you want, into the sanctity of life. And that Jesus states that I am the way, the truth, and the life. We don't have the right to end the process of fetal development. And I can even prove it scientifically if you want me to. For those massa cells people. Okay? Let me give you some scientific evidence. What scientists among you would say that the process of fetal development is not alive? Even if you want to take this mass of cells argument, each one of those cells is fundamentally alive. Each one of those cells has formed into a cohesive organism. So you might not want to say, oh, it's not human life. Okay, let's hold off on that one for the moment. Let's not say that scientifically a fetus, or I should say, a zygote, an embryo, or a fetus is not in some form or fashion an organism. It's a collection of living cells forming together into one cohesive structure that is alive. So the argument is not whether or not the fetus, the embryo, or the zygote is alive. The argument is whether or not it's important life. So let's get our facts straight for these women who want to march like a bunch of morons down the streets of Washington, D.C. and disrupt a perfectly legitimate election, claiming all sorts of ridiculous progressive liberal ideas, which I cannot be sympathetic to because they are extremist ideas, and they breed extremism, and they cause divisiveness, and they disrupt the natural cycles of both the political system that governs us and life itself. But that's another argument altogether as well. And yes, I get very passionate about this. I get really pissed off when I see this stuff. But let's get back into it. So scientifically, we're not talking about whether or not it's alive or where life begins. Don't give me the argument that life doesn't begin at conception, because you are talking about living organisms from the beginning of that zygote development. Cells coming together, living cells coming together to form a living organism right from the get-go, as soon as sperm meets egg. This is indisputable. This is science. You don't have to get theological at all to say that that is a fact. Okay? So it's not about whether or not life begins at conception. We all know that life begins at conception. What you're basically saying is that it's just not an important life. And it's expendable. And it can be eradicated at will because it's no longer convenient. And then you throw all the arguments about, oh, what about the women who are raped? Oh, what about the women who are in danger of dying? And so, you know, if they give birth, they'll die. I can tell you right now, the majority of abortions in this country, at least in the United States, are being conducted as a form of birth control and for no other reason whatsoever. They simply just don't find it convenient to be pregnant, and they don't want to be parents, and they don't want the responsibilities and the hassles of that come with 18 plus years of responsibility. And so it's much easier to just go for their little operation and claim that it's my body. Well, guess what? It's not. Because if it was your body, then no one would die. So let's go on now to another side of the argument, and then we will open up some discussion. And if you'd like to participate in this discussion, I'd like to hear from you. You can call us. I've never actually tried this, but we can see how it works. But you can call us at 802-321-0073. That's 802-321-0073. And we'll try to take your call. Hopefully Skype will cooperate here. Yeah.
Let me jump in there real quick, Brian.
Go ahead.
I got since you're actually on the topic of incest and rape as an excuse for abortion, I actually have in front of me some statistics from 2015 from Florida. Okay, it's only one state out of the union, but I would say it fairly represents a cross section of the United States. You live there, you could probably vouch and say that there's a it's not Wyoming or anything like that. It's a
right.
fair cross section. So, so there 2015, there were 71,740 abortions performed in Florida. All right. Incest accounted for 0.001% of that. The life of the mother being in danger accounted for 0.065%. Rape accounted for 0.085%. The health of the mother being in danger accounted for 0.288%. The mental health being in jeopardy accounted for 0.294%. The fetal development not taking place accounted for 0.666% of it. Now, for the social and economic problems of the mother accounted for 6.268%. And for elective abortions for no reason whatsoever other than using it for birth control accounted for 92.330% of all abortions in Florida. So out of those 8 there, Only 2 broke the percentage mark, and that's for economic reasons, as in I don't want to pay for the child, or I don't want to even attempt to pay for the child, so I'm just going to kill it. And the other one is essentially birth control. Everything else is below a percentage point, and I always hear incest, rape. They're almost to the incest is 0.001. That's not even a statistic, probability of it even happening more than likely. And you can, like you were saying, it's used for abortion or used for birth control.
Yeah. Very, very great information to provide. That is very concrete and indisputable. So you can argue all these things, and even if they were valid arguments, which I would even question the arguments of some of those, like I'm not even sure rape would be a justifiable reason for committing a not theologically, but I mean I could see where there'd be a or I should say a psychosocial reason. I could see that from a humanist point of view, but I could not. I mean, theologically, obviously, there is no excuse. I mean, this is not an old problem. I mean, I'm sorry, this is not a new problem. This is an old problem, is what I meant to say. And I mean, even in the early church, we're talking literally just a couple generations after the apostles. People were leaving their babies in trash heaps. Christians would run to save them. There were people that were in charge of looking through trash heaps in their respective cities to find abandoned infants so that they could be nursed back to health and cared for. This has been part of the Christian identity since the very beginning. And yet we have people like this Michigan Franciscan priest. Let me see. It was Father William Luger, who gave a homily wearing one of those pink pussy hat knitted hats. And we got a picture of him here. Go to my Facebook if you want to see the article, or it's on churchmilitant.com. This is a Roman Catholic priest supporting this march. He actually this is about reproductive rights, they say. Reproductive rights. And then they have the audacity to claim in their guiding principles that they want to avoid internal violence of the spirit. They have the audacity to use that very language. And yet they are committing a complete violent act against an unborn child. Just because they've tricked themselves into believing that this is just a mass of cells and is not important life. Not important life. I guarantee you some of these people that marched in this would probably are vegetarians or vegans on the basis that eating animals is wrong. But yet they're probably all too happy to have an abortion, or to at least make sure that women have the right to it, because it's all about their reproductive rights. Well, that's a load of crap. It is a lie and a fabrication, and it is a delusional position to hold, especially for a Christian. I have no authority over people who choose not to be Christians, other than to present my arguments the same way that they present theirs. But as a successor to the apostles, I have an obligation to teach correct theology and to guide people who are Christians along the right path. And so I am telling you with the fullest extent of my apostolic authority that if you support Women's March, you are no Christian. This priest in Michigan, was it Michigan? I lost the page now. Let me see. Wherever he was, I'm lost it. Michigan. This priest in Michigan should be defrocked. His bishop should throw him out of the church. Let him go and march with these women It's not about human rights. It has nothing to do with human rights when you're depriving a human of their rights. And a fetus is human. Want to get into genetics? Break it down at the genetic level. It's absolutely 100% human DNA. It's just the early stages of a human. But you only want to believe what you want to see, and then you want to use science to justify it. Well, science, even the science proves you wrong. Sorry. And as Deacon Thomas illustrated with his statistics, clearly, it's not about rape victims. It's not about a woman's health. It's about convenience and just wanting an extra step of birth control there because you couldn't control yourself. Let's call it out for what it is. You wanted to have sex for pleasure, and you didn't want to use responsible methods of prevention. And sometimes even the best methods fail. And you still want to play God. That's what it comes down to. I'm not against birth control. I really am not. In fact, our church actually has a position that says that responsible birth control use is acceptable in our tradition. It's not acceptable to the Roman Catholic Church. I want to make that clear. But in the Nicholean Church, we don't pass a judgment on birth control use. As long as it's not the morning after pill or anything that would disrupt the development of a zygote after it has started the process of development. So morning after pill we would condemn, but condom use we would encourage because condom use prevents abortions for those people who are unscrupulous enough to use them as an option. So, this is what Women's March is about, people. They'll try to lure you in and say it's about rights for all, and then they have to bring in that LGBTQIA nonsense. And then they throw in Muslims, too. I found that very funny, that we throw in Muslims. Muslims would be the first ones to deprive you of your human rights as a woman. Okay? Don't give me the moderate Muslim stuff. Because theologically and politically, Islam does not have a good track record for human rights. It just doesn't. Go to any Islamic country and see it for yourself. Go to our allies, Saudi Arabia, and take a peek. And tell me if you see human rights there for the LGBTQIA people. Or women in general. But yeah, you're going to throw it in there. You're going to use your human rights as a woman to march for people who would deprive you of it if they had the political authority to do so. And let me make this very clear. I am not against Muslims. I have Muslim friends. I like them as people. I hate and despise their politics. And as far as I'm concerned, Islam is no religion. Islam is just a political system that just happens to use religious language as a justification for its principles. But it is every bit a political structure, just like communism is a political structure, just like neo-Nazism is a political structure. If those things can be condemned without repercussion and claims of hate crimes or hate speech, then we have every right to condemn Islam on its political basis. It chose to be political. It fully embraces the political. And you might say, but Bishop, you're being political right now. Well, the fact of the matter is, politics doesn't have the right to define when life begins. That's a decision for philosophers. And the professional philosophers of today are the theologians and church leaders. So it is every bit, this department of who has of the moral right to kill someone absolutely falls into the department of the church, whether you like it or not, because it's a moral problem. And I used to actually maintain a very strong anti-abortion position, but and a pro-life position. And people would say, well, how can you do that as a Christian bishop? That seems kind of hypocritical. Well, it actually isn't when you understand what I'm sorry, did I say pro-life? No. I was anti-abortion, pro-choice. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. But I eventually have recently fully embraced the pro-life movement because Women's March made it political for me. But the reason I was pro-choice, even though I was anti-abortion, was because I don't like big government. And I don't like government getting into the personal lives of people's decisions. I have always seen abortion as a moral problem. And I believe that moral problems should be dictated by the church, not by the state. And that was my whole position. But if you want to go out there and march and condemn our president and not even use your brain half the time when you're spewing your intolerances that you claim that people that are not in your circle of people or are not aligned to your circle of people do, you are always condemning us of being intolerant. The only intolerance I've seen recently have been from you people. But let's just step outside of that argument for a moment and just look at it as it is. The reality is that you made it political. So you want big government, you want the government to be in control of these things, well then guess what? Then that brings us, the church, into it. Because this is a moral issue, it is a problem of ethics, and politicians are not equipped or qualified to make those decisions. It is the realm of philosophers and church leaders, whether you like it or not. And the church has had a long-standing history of condemning this sort of thing. So don't be using abortion and reproductive rights as a justification for your feminism. And this is incidentally why I condemn feminism. Because it's not about giving women equal opportunity. It's not even about giving people equal opportunity. It's about replacing and shifting the balance of power in the favor of what you see to be a minority or a weak population. I don't know. Deacon, what do you think about all that?
Oh, what do I think?
Give us your thoughts. I've talked enough. I'm kind of getting myself angry.
It's interesting. I fully support women having equal rights. I mean that's an obvious when you live in this country. Everybody should have equal rights. And to me, that's kind of where this Women's March lied to people, because women do have the same rights as men. There is no institutionalized sexism in this country. Find me a law in this country that says a man can do this, but a woman can't. There is none. So that the very basis of this Women's March for rights is a lie. And that's why they tackled other issues. That's why it wasn't about women's rights. It was about abortion. It was about it's about denouncing Donald Trump his second day in office. What laws has he proposed that's going to hurt females? That's going to hurt the gay community. That's going to do any of these things that they're terrified of. He hasn't proposed anything. He hasn't took a single right away from anybody. And if he does, I'll be more than happy to jump up there and denounce him. There's a political, progressive ideology behind this Women's March, and if you look and you can see that the hypocrisy behind it when there were conservatives there, conservative women that went there to voice their opinion against abortion or being pro-President Trump. And some of them were physically attacked. Some of them, of course, they're all getting cussed at, the signs ripped out of their hands. Where's the choice for females when it comes to not being a progressive? It's okay if you're a progressive, then, oh yeah, you're good. But if you do not have that progressive liberal ideology, then you don't have rights within their eyes. That there's hypocrisy there. And when it comes to 65,000 female babies are aborted every day, where's the outrage of that? Where's the outrage for minorities when Planned Parenthood is more in minority neighborhoods than they are in upper class neighborhoods,
and taking our tax dollars to pay for it? I mean,
exactly.
They're forcing us as Christians to pay for something that we don't even believe in. Imagine if we tried to force them to pay for something that they don't believe in.
And we're given millions of dollars to Planned Parenthood, but oddly enough, they can go ahead and take millions of dollars and push it into a political candidate. So essentially, we as taxpayers are freeing up millions of dollars for them to push into, their political, candidate of choosing, to help, further their agenda, their agenda is they don't care about women. They care about making money. And that is all they care about. They make money off of abortions. They do provide some free things, but there are more women's clinics out there that don't have anything to do with abortion than there are Planned Parenthood clinics. So if Planned Parenthood was to disappear off the face of this earth, women's access to health care and specific female issues and problems would not be affected. It wouldn't be affected at all. And that's another lie that the progressive left tries to, Planned Parenthood is the only clinic out there for women. There's nothing else out there. No, there's more non-Planned Parenthood clinics out there that do free services than there are Planned Parenthood by ridiculous numbers. I mean, I don't have them off the top of my head, but it's 1 to hundreds, of more clinics that are non-Planned Parenthood that provide female services. There's always that progressive agenda being pushed that it's got to be Planned Parenthood. It's got to be pro-abortion.
It's absolutely ridiculous. And Deacon, we're at the end of the show. I thank you so very much for all of your input. And to all of the listeners, sorry for getting angry, but I hope that you're as angry as I am about this topic, because it is absolutely reprehensible what's going on out there. Fight it with every fiber of your being. If you are a Christian, you cannot support this movement. This is Bishop Bryan Ouellette and Deacon Thomas Moreland saying goodbye, and we'll see you hopefully next week with a brand new show. Take care, everyone.